Okay. So we're live. Let's give people a second to find it.
Yeah, no problem. Is the lighting okay here? Let me see if I can get.
You're good. You sound good. You sound better than I do. So.
Okay.
Just trying to find the background here and stuff. All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. Justin here. As you probably know by now, we are tnholler.com. At the TN Holler is where you can find us. We also have hollers all across the state, throughout Tennessee, and that's thanks to your support. We really do appreciate it. Your small dollar monthly donations keep us going and growing. Shout out to Lisa Parker. If you want to help us out, if you know anybody buying or selling a house in Middle Tennessee, do it through her. She's very supportive of us. That would be a big help. And then also we have another sponsor, Abby Rubenfeld Law Office. She does family law. She's a civil rights lawyer. She does all kinds of stuff, and she's being very supportive of us. You might know her. She was one of the lawyers on the Obergefell case before the Supreme Court. She's awesome, and we really appreciate that she's getting behind us. Today, I wanted to talk to you about a issue that I think is on the forefront of everyone's mind. It is a big discussion about the war on public schools, but one of the fronts in that war has been the CRT outrage, critical race theory outrage that has been drummed up all throughout the country, especially here in Tennessee. We've been the tip of the spear on a lot of this stuff. They passed an anti-CRT law at the state level. It comes up all the time at the school board level. You know, it's still an issue in these Republican primaries here in Williamson County. And even though they have told us openly that this was manufactured intentionally and it has become a synonym for everything Republicans don't like, they just group it under this CRT banner. And we know that, they've told us that, but today we're going to hear from somebody who can give us firsthand knowledge of that, because he was a lobbyist that was involved with the privatization effort and has inside knowledge about that. So Charles Siler, thanks for joining us today. Good to see you.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate you all bringing me on and having an opportunity to talk to people in Tennessee about just kind of what the people pushing this CRT panic are really trying to do. And even though they're happy to publicly tell everybody that it's fake, why it's so dangerous. So.
Well, and that's really an important thing, and it is dangerous. And, I guess let's start by what I'd love to hear is just what was your role? What did you used to do?
So I started off in libertarian politics. I just kind of grew up in a conservative, evangelical Christian family that had very strong libertarian beliefs. And so I went to a university, George Mason University, studied economics there, which is like a training ground for libertarian policy folks and things like that. And so when I left there, I went to the Goldwater Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. And this is the place that developed the modern ESA voucher that even Tennessee had passed, I think a few years back. But basically, these were created as a shell game, money laundering workaround to get around state constitutions that banned public funding of religious institutions. So the separation of church and state, where a lot of school voucher programs were being declared unconstitutional by state Supreme Courts. So they were like, we need a new game, we need a new system. So they invented this.
Hold on, let me just stop you right there. Let me just stop you right there. So you're saying within the circles that you were in, they were openly saying we have to game this system with these vouchers.
I mean, it's not even in the circle on that one. They're pretty public about that they invented these specifically to get around the separation of church. Basically, it's called a Blaine Amendment in state constitutions. And the Blaine amendments that almost every state has, or some variation of it, prohibits public funding of religious instruction or institutions furthering religious institutions with public funds. So a lot of school voucher programs, like obviously a large number of private schools that people would spend the vouchers at are religious institutions. And so that would be a problem, obviously a violation of the state constitution. So what they did, the way a regular voucher would work is the state would say, you pick the school and you send your kid to that private school, and then we send them money. That's the voucher. The problem is then the state is giving taxpayer money to a religious school, violates the amendment. So those are unconstitutional. So then what they said is, how about if we give the state money to the parent, and then the parent gives that money to the religious school? And now the money is like, the state isn't giving it to them, it's the parent. And so that was the like kind of shell game about it that made it kind of impervious to those same legal challenges. So
okay, so
why they were invented.
And what's at the root of that? Because what you're describing is something that we talk about a lot, because Betsy DeVos was very open in one interview on a Christian radio station. She said she sees her agenda in the public education sphere as trying to advance God's kingdom using public education funds. So, and Betsy DeVos has been here in Tennessee helping Governor Lee push his vouchers. So, it's not hard to connect the dots. So, it's a privatization effort. It's a money grab, but it's also religious based and ideological. And so what are they trying to accomplish exactly? Like, what do you think is at the root of all this?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a couple of different things, because they do kind of build a coalition of people who don't have exactly the same values, but who are willing to work together to like each kind of achieve their own goals. So you have like the Betsy DeVosses and like the Bradleys and the Kochs. These are like ultra wealthy folks who have like a lot of money, but not just money. They control like a lot of like resources in the country. So like whether it's like factories or manufacturing or like logistical systems, like they control a lot of like resources. So they have a lot of actual like meaningful real world power. And so they're mostly like anti-regulatory. They don't want any government interference that like might like dilute or impact their ability to make more money, to extract more wealth, to exploit people more. And so these people are not just supporting privatization of education, they're also doing like anti-labor union work. So like right to work stuff, they push it, anti-minimum wage stuff. So they fight like minimum wage laws. They also fight like ballot initiatives and people to have ballot access to change minimum wage laws. So like that kind of sphere of those people are looking at like, we have like a strong economic interest in deregulation. Then you also have like the religious groups who don't share the same like economic interests per se, but they like also see that they want to fight government regulation because they want to hold on to like an extremist view of education, of like child raising, and also just like life in general. So these are the people who are fighting like abortion access, who are fighting gay marriage, who are also fighting privatization of education. And so they kind of just have different agendas, but they really meet in this sweet spot of privatizing education, because it really serves both of their interests really well. One is to like get rid of a public institution where people are like educated about how to like maybe critically think about the world and might not be so easily exploited when they're like educated by like an industrialist. And then also on the other hand, you have like a very conservative community that is worried about their children like learning about the world around them and maybe starting to question some of the beliefs that they encounter at home. So
can you connect the dot for me a little more directly between this education fight and deregulation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard to deregulate because people love regulations. Like when you really get down to it, I know like there's a lot of like rhetoric around like red tape and bureaucracy and stuff, and governments are imperfect and there's plenty to criticize, but people like having clean drinking water. people like knowing that like the food that they eat has like some like base level of safety to it, and the drugs that we take. And really, if you're like running a purely private, like a profit making operation, and you don't care about those kinds of things, then the regulations and like government power like really is like the strongest thing like standing in your way from being able to make money as
Sure.
easily as possible. Like if you can just dump pollutants right into the river, then like
That's a
you don't
lot
have to
easier.
pay for cleanup. Yeah, like
Right.
it's cheaper, you make more money faster. And so those people are really against collective power to like stand up to their concentrated power of wealth. And so that's where the deregulation comes in. And so when people have good experiences with public institutions and government, then it's hard to tell them that government and public institutions are bad for them. And so
That's such
public
an
schools,
abstract way of, I mean, like, I get it, and I fully believe that that's exactly right, that that is what they're thinking, but it's like such an abstract way of viewing this situation. Like, so you think, oh, if we have a good experience with public education, then that means that we're going to be pro-regulation? Like, is there any evidence to back that up?
yeah, they've talked about it publicly. So, like Milton Friedman, who's one of the fathers of kind of libertarian thought in the United States, talks a lot about like Social Security and like how hard it is to get people to feel like Social Security is a bad thing. Because it's like it supports so many people, like when they get to like the end of their working life, and as like retirement benefits and things like diminish, like Social Security becomes even more important. But so like they knew that they couldn't attack Social Security because people have good experiences with it. And so it's hard to get people to view big government as bad when big government does positive things for them in a real meaningful way.
Exactly. That right there is the root of everything. It's the root of why they're so mad that the Democrats might actually pass a bill that addresses climate change and lowers drug
Mm-hmm.
prices. It's like
Right.
anytime that we show that government can help people, that hurts their cause, because
Exactly.
their cause is attacking government, vilifying government. It's like Reagan said, the scariest words are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean we have to think that government is flawless and be
Right.
for big government, but we have to understand that the attack on government is coming from a greedy and ideologically driven place. And so you were at the core of that. I guess tell me a little bit about your evolution. Like, what made you change your mind on what you were doing?
Yeah, so I mean, the shortest way I can say is like I really believed like getting the government out of people's way so they can do what they want was the best way. And like I said, I still think that government, like there's plenty to criticize,
Sure.
but when I started actually working and like helping pass like these libertarian, like anti-government, anti-collective power policies, I actually also paid attention to the outcomes. Like I was an economist, like by education. So I wanted to see like, hey, can we track how these people are doing? Are they better off? Are they worse off? Like, because like if your goal is sincere about improving people's lives, then you want to measure the impact of things that you're doing so that one, you can like brag about it and say, hey, look, like you all criticized us, but we fucking made things better, right? And so the two things kind of happened. One, when there was like data, like it showed the opposite. Like people were like materially worse off from like the policies that we enacted. And so like work that I did with Governor Sam Brownback in Kansas, there's a lot written about the Kansas experiment that he did and what an epic failure it was. And so like that's like, I mean, you can't like deny that if you have
Is
any
that where they had to
sincerity.
go to a 4-day school week?
They did a lot of things. They had to shut down a ton of government. Like
Yeah.
so many services were shuttered, and people were so like devastated by like the destruction of public services there that it went from a solid Republican state, like at the state government level, to like immediately flipping away from all of that. Like, I mean, they're kind of edging back to it now, unfortunately, as like short-term memory for politics like affects a lot of people. But the other piece was that I would point out that we don't have good data about a lot of programs, and we could just write in requirements for like school vouchers. Like, hey, why don't we like mandate like testing and like we get the results and see how the kids are doing, measure their progress. I mean, we're paying for it. It's public funds. We should know, like, is this working? Is this not working? And so the people that I worked with would be like, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe we should do that. But then they would never, ever do it. And it would be so easy. We could, like, I wrote bills. Like, you could write one line. We had all the lobbyists, we had all the politicians in our pockets. Like, we could have passed it, no problem. But they didn't want to, because that's not what they're there for. They don't care whether the kids are better off. They don't care whether they're worse off. They only care that the money is coming out of the schools. And so they have a lot of problems when it comes there, but that is what like changed me. So like, I mean, I can spin off in 100 different directions about the problems, but for me, that just highlighted that like, they weren't living up to the rhetoric and like the like ideals that I thought we were like there to advance. So I think if you have any sincerity and any like degree of like integrity, you have to look at it and you can't continue to do that work.
So you sound like you actually were coming from a genuine place at one point, or not at one point, you were in your own mind. And then when you started to have doubts, were there people that you could talk to about that in there also? Or were you sort of shunned, and were you nervous about expressing that to anybody?
No, actually it was like weirdly, like the work environment in those places was like incredible. Like it's like, if as far as work culture goes, those are some of the best places I've ever worked. Like well paid, great vacation, like good benefits, but like you were empowered to like manage projects, like really
No, I'm not talking about that, because that all seems like reasons to,
yeah.
It's like their loyalty was being bought in that way. Like very clearly, all of the people that are on this page here are well compensated and like their jobs. It almost feels like that's why, rocking the boat. If you rock the boat, they'll be like, yeah, don't do that. Like, I'm just wondering if there were people who kind of knew better, but didn't want to say anything.
Yeah. So like at the time, honestly, like a critique of myself is like I had like some blinders to things and like didn't always recognize like how sincere a person may or may not be about a thing. Like I never felt uncomfortable. Like I talked to folks about questions and stuff, and we would like kind of like have back and forth about, okay, like how do we work on this? And but like at the end of the day, like everybody was friendly about it, but nobody ever actually wanted to address any of it. And so like that's why it was like a process for me of like, oh shit, like they're saying they want to like address this, but there's nothing like really being done. And it's not because they didn't have like opportunity or the resources to do it. It meant that they like, the only reason it didn't get done is because they didn't have the interest and the desire. And so that for me, eventually I had to like confront the reality of like, okay, the only reason that is because fixing this or addressing this issue is because it doesn't serve their real goal. And so that's when I had to realize their real goals aren't what they say they are. And so then I had to like go through a whole process of like investigating that, and interrogating those questions.
Well, the thing that surprised me a little to hear is that they didn't just go, well, let's just manipulate the data, because that's what seems like happens here in Tennessee. They'll look for whatever suits their own needs. Frankly, I think a lot of the time it seems like they're instituting policies to try to go get a piece of data that they can then use to institute another policy that will fit their own needs. So, I'm a little surprised that they shrugged it off as opposed to just being like, no, we'll just cherry pick.
Well, so to that end, I would say one thing that is interesting is like they have a lot of research, even in the school choice spectrum, that where they publish like their own studies. And if you go and like read their studies and then look at the stuff that they cite, like you can even see that they are cherry picking, and like the overall premise is that like these kids are worse off, like from their own research. So yeah, they cherry pick, and the thing is like the reality of politics like this is kind of two pronged. One, like the average voter, like they're busy and like they're getting busier because like of inflation and shit. So like they've got to work more jobs or more hours. They're trying to get their kids through school. They're trying to get like to activities. They maybe have responsibilities for a parent or something. Like people are just busy. And so like it's hard to pay attention to like, oh, this random think tank produced a study about vouchers and they said it did this great thing. Like I don't have time, or maybe even like really the confidence or comfort in like looking at the data that they looked at to see what the reality is. So like they can just like, if they hear anything at all, they're just going to hear the piece that's being promoted by them, the cherry picked data. The other piece is that these groups, they have cozy relationships with all of the lawmakers, like through the donations that get made by, like Betsy DeVos donates shit tons of money. And so then when her lobbyists go to talk to a politician, he knows like where his bread is buttered, you know, and it's not by like Tim and Sue who live in Johnson County, you know, like coming down to the state legislature. It's so like the impact that someone can have on these lawmakers is like really diminished compared to the power that these organized lobbyists have because of their connections.
One time, Governor Lee was at a town hall in a rural part of the state before we kind of started being the holler, and they felt a lot more comfortable in these town halls, and they still kind of do. And a woman stood up and she said, you know, I don't have kids in the public school system. I shouldn't have to pay for public schools, you know, and that's really what they think, right? Like they think they don't want to pay taxes to things they're not using, which is really ultimately the disintegration of our entire country and system. And Governor Lee, you know, on video, basically agreed.
Yeah,
and
they want
so
to get rid of
what
it.
I would ask you is, you know, what do you think their end goal is?
Well, for public education specifically, it's to get rid of public education, not just like public schools, but also public funding. So even the voucher programs, like in the end, they would go away too, because like you still have to get taxed to pay for that. And so the way, like an ideal model for them would be that like people individually value education, so they individually pay for it in a free market. So like you show how important education is to you by how hard you work to pay for it. And so that means like, you know, all the like college loan debt crisis that we have, like they want to do that for K-12. Like you want to send your kid to the best kindergarten, well, you better start taking out student loans for
That's
your
happening
kindergarten.
here. That's happening
Yeah,
here.
so that's their vision for the future is it is anti-equity, and like I know that equity has become a buzzword, but really anything that addresses the reality that like you might just be born into a family that doesn't have access to the same resources as another family, and is that your fault? You know, you might be born with some kind of like developmental disability or something, and like should you suffer because of that? Like to them, yeah, like they really think that like if you're not providing value to society and demonstrating that value through profit, then you know you're worthless, because to them profit is a reflection of your value to society.
Right, the prosperity gospel. You keep saying they. I'm wondering, you know, and you say you work for libertarians, and you know, the name that always comes to mind when I hear that is the Kochs. And I know they have a presence here. Andy Ogles, who's the mayor of Murray County, used to run Americans for Prosperity here. He's running for Congress now. How deep are the Koch tentacles in all of this and in Tennessee, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that one, just a quick thing, is the Kochs and the Koch brothers. I mean, or the Koch brother now, as one's died.
Right.
Is that like they're kind of shorthand for like this like universe of conservative, libertarian, like wealthy funders. And so, like I mentioned, the Bradley Foundation, Betsy DeVos is just as wrapped up with them, and really there's like probably 20 plus like big names. I can't say all of them because I have NDAs that kind of limit that.
Okay.
But anyway, but the point, but to your question is, yeah, it's super deep. Like, because look, if you're a regular person trying to like change policy and stand up for public schools, like nobody's paying you to do that. You're volunteering, you're spending your time, and like you can only invest so much energy into that. And like if you keep hitting a wall for a couple of years and you're not getting paid and you got other things to do and your kids are growing up without you because you're always at the legislature watching committee meetings or whatever, but you're going to kind of give up and you're going to burn out, and it's not your fault. But like these other folks, like that work at AFP and work for American Federation for Children, like they're getting paid to full-time focus on this, so they don't get burned out. They get to go home to their kids. They get to take a month of vacation every year, you know. And what they do is they work and they build relationships with the lawmakers. They learn the processes, they learn the system, so that they know, like, this bill died here. Well, I can put this amendment on this thing and work it through a different channel so it's not really dead, and they can resurrect stuff. And you might never know that if you're just like constantly turning over all these volunteers who are getting burned out. So it's a combination of, one, how much funding they have, so they have resources that are really everywhere. And then the other piece is they can keep people from burning out by like paying them to professionally focus on this task.
Right. So what you're describing what you're describing is, you know, there's no better investment for a wealthy corporation than a politician. And it's both sides, but it's especially Republican politicians. Let's be clear about that. And, you know, on the Democratic side, the things that they're fighting for are often things that are going to hurt wealthy people. So you're dependent on, you know, billionaires' philanthropy as opposed to billionaires investing. And, you know, that's a big imbalance. You know, when billionaires are investing because they know they're going to get a return, there's an endless amount of money. And we've already seen how useful that is. And the ROI is very high, as opposed to when they're investing because they know it's the right thing to do. At that point, there's probably some limits to what they're willing to do. And, you know, it becomes about, can working people get it together enough to swing the pendulum back? Just to bring it back to where we are with this conversation, what role do you think CRT has played in all of this?
So CRT is like just the new word. I mean, this stuff, I wrote about it recently in The Economist, about like, I mean, how far back this stuff goes. I mean, really, if you dig into history, it probably goes back even further than the United States existing. The idea that like people are always going to push back against progress. So, but the reality is that like, parents have complained about their kids learning about evolution in science class. They've complained about their kids having to go to school with black kids. They've complained about kids learning about like sexual health and reproductive health in school. I mean, they've complained about social emotional learning. They've complained about equity programs and diversity stuff. And so CRT is just the current boogeyman. And honestly, like, it's not even really that effective for them. It makes a lot of noise, and like they can pass all kinds of legislation. Like they passed the CRT ban here that is like, you know, that you talked about, that's going to be really detrimental to like the public education system and how effective it can be just in teaching history and other classes, like just at a base level. So they're really damaging, but like they don't even help that side achieve its goals that well. Like there's been a number of school board races where they pushed like really hardline candidates and stuff on this CRT stuff, and they get beat even in really radical areas. Like New Hampshire is like a hotbed of libertarians. They get
here too.
Here
too. I'm in a very conservative county, and a lot of the Williamson County candidates that are the Moms for Liberty candidates that were running as Republicans got beat in their primaries. There are still a couple left running independent, though, and the challenge is making sure people know who they are.
Yeah, it's not 100%, but but like relative to what they're pouring into it, they're losing big, and in Georgia too. But so it really is connected to this concept. Like we hear it a lot, like people hate Congress, but they love their congressman. Like people think public education is really messed up, but they love their specific public school, and they're like, they want their kids to have a great public school. And so they might vote for a legislator or a governor who like is anti-public school, but when it comes to their neighborhood, like they don't want that in their neighborhood. So like it really is about connecting these dots for people in a meaningful way where like, look, the damage that you're trying to prevent in your community, like you're also kind of empowering those people at the state level, you know, and that is hard sometimes to connect the dots because there's so many different pieces that people think about when they're voting in a two-party system. So
what role do you think race plays in this?
A lot, actually, a ton. I mean, the whole modern voucher movement and school privatization movement is born absolutely out of Brown v. Board of Education and the mandatory integration of public schools. I mean, white parents did not want to pay for their kids to go to school with black kids and pay to like adequately educate black children. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's just reality. If your grandparents threw rocks at black kids trying to go to high school, man, you just have to confront that reality. Like I do too. Like my family, like I'm descended from slave owners, and like my family went to schools that weren't integrated until the late 70s, like just before the 80s in Mississippi. I mean, there's things in our past that like you don't have to feel guilty about, but if you just want to ignore and pretend aren't real, then that's more of a problem. So school vouchers were born as a way to get white kids out of schools and send them to schools where black students couldn't go. Like private schools are always allowed to discriminate, and still to this day they can discriminate on religion, they can discriminate on your like sexual orientation, your gender presentation. I mean, really anything. And even if the law says that they can't discriminate on those things, they figure out other substitute discriminations, like whether it's like textbook fees or like school uniforms or like grooming standards or some other thing that like isn't technically like discrimination for race or whatever. But I mean, we have a ton of segregation academies that exist in the South to this day, that are a direct result of school privatization. I mean, there's counties in Virginia that closed their entire school systems because they didn't want to pay for schools that black kids would go to, and they sent white kids to private schools instead. And so the modern voucher movement is like, they try to hide that and they're ashamed of that connection, but they still lean into it when they talk about like this is CRT and it's all because they want to make white kids feel guilty. They're like inflaming people's like racist, like kind of like socialization to like try to advance a policy aim. So they're happy to lean into the racism when it suits them, and they really want to cover up the past of like how it's all built on like furthering racism.
Well, I appreciate that you're out here fighting the good fight now. I guess as a last thing before I let you go, I just want to give you an opportunity. What would you say to somebody who's doing the work you used to do and maybe having some questions about it now?
I mean, it's hard, as you said, man. Like the pay and the like the job is great. Like it's easy. You make a lot of money. And it can feel rewarding until you really take a look at yourself. So I think that if you're sincere at all, like take a look at like what people aren't willing to do and ask why are they not willing to do these things, and what does that actually mean? Like what's driving that hesitancy or that like refusal to address like very clear problems in the systems that you're trying to make better, and from there, like really understand the motives of the people paying you and decide if that's something that you want to keep pushing. So I decided I couldn't do that. And now I work every day to try to stop them across the country. And fortunately, we can be effective. So there is a way forward. And yeah, the pay's not as great, man. So if you're thinking about coming over to the side, you just gotta prep for that.
Well, I appreciate it. I think conversion stories are really important. They build bridges for other people to have similar epiphanies. So thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for coming on here. Stay in touch for sure. And, you know, anytime you have articles that you write or things you think people in Tennessee need to know, please send them our way so we can holler them out there. All right.
Hey, Justin, I love what you're doing. Like, you guys are doing great work in a state that is super critical. Like, Tennessee is a big state for like driving policy. I mean, Arizona and Florida and Texas are like the crazy extremes. Tennessee is where it starts to show that it's kind of mainstreaming. And so one of the great things is like seeing the reaction to the Hillsdale president, like calling teachers dumb. Like they really think teachers are the stupidest people. They have really arrogant views about this stuff. So seeing how people in Tennessee are reacting to that and pushing back, that's great and really inspiring. So the work that you're doing to educate people is very critical. So thank you for all that you all do there. So
thank you. I appreciate that, Charles. Stay in touch. All right.
All right. You'll have a great one. Take care.
All right. Take care. So that's Charles Siler. Hopefully you heard his story. I'm going to look at some of your comments now. I wanted to talk to him because I saw his article about the role that he used to play as a lobbyist in fomenting some of the outrage. And, I think it's really important to hear from voices like that. And, I know you guys who are watching here are some of the people that kind of pay attention to this stuff. But, arming you with the knowledge of these people, it's important because then you go out and have these conversations with people in your lives. So I want to look at a couple of the comments. Jennifer said, thank you for sharing with us. And then Gapper, I want to get to this because, you come on here all the time, and I appreciate you coming on here. I know we don't agree on a lot, but you always say this. You always say just throwing the racism card around like it's nothing. You seem to be on this mission to act like racism doesn't exist and isn't a thing. And yet you just heard from a guy who was inside the... Sorry, I got a call there. This guy was inside the think tanks designing programs to push privatization. He grew up in an evangelical family, and I asked him, what role does race play? And he says it plays a big role. And vouchers were born out of desegregation. So you're here. I don't know if you're white or black. I don't know. I've never seen you. Your profile. Sorry, another call. Your profile big is not a person. So I don't know if you're white or black, but if you're white, like, go ask a black person if racism is real. Like, this is, you do this every time, and like, you seem like a reasonable guy, but that's... racism is real. Like, we see it all the time here, especially in Tennessee, where they wouldn't remove a KKK Grand Wizard bust from our Capitol, and at the very least, they're willing to play footsie with racists. So that's just as bad. And the anti-racism movement, what that means is it's not enough to just not be racist. You have to be anti-racist, and I fully agree and believe that, or else some very nefarious forces in this country are going to win. You say my point is not something that should be tossed around. You show me hard facts about someone being racist. I mean, it happens all the time. Like, we just posted a video of a guy who was a 20-year worker at Dillard's in Texas calling a black father the N-word in front of his 10-year-old son. Dillard's just fired him because that man stood and took a stand against it. Racism is real. It's everywhere. And it is a factor in a lot of this stuff. Have we come a long way? Yes, we have. Do we have a lot further to go? Absolutely we do. And especially here in Tennessee, I don't assume you think racism doesn't exist. You come on here and you doubt it every single time. And I also just asked the head of the Putnam County Republican Party about racism, and she's telling you, she's the chair of the Putnam County Republican Party in Cookeville, telling you that her party is filled with racism. So I don't know what more you need to hear, man. So I appreciate you coming on here, but like, this thing where you doubt every time somebody tells you racism is real, like, ask yourself why that's happening, and maybe go talk to somebody who isn't white about their experience with racism in America. And I'm not trying to make this all about that, but I think it's important to address that head on. Again, appreciate you coming here. Happy to have this discussion face to face if you want to come on sometime. Back to Charles for a second. Really appreciate that he's willing to tell the truth about what's happening in the privatization circles. Privatization of our schools is what we're seeing at every level. Vouchers, charters, CRT, books, librarians. It's all about dismantling public schools, a war on our public schools. It's all about that. So, and he just told you their goal is no public school anymore. Dismantling it. Funded by right-wing billionaires who call themselves libertarians. What libertarian really means is they don't like taxes, so they can keep more of their money. So it's greed, it's religious ideology, it's a lot of things, but what it isn't is about our kids. And so if you care about our kids, we need to fight against this stuff. And one way you do that is by showing up here, and I appreciate it. One lady saying the whole party is racist doesn't mean it's true. She didn't say the whole party is racist. She said the party leaders are racist in her party right now, where she used to be the chair. So one lady saying it doesn't mean it's true. One commenter doubting it doesn't mean it's not. Sorry, you do a terrible job. Fight against choice. I'm not sure what that means, Sherry. Do I do a terrible job, or does Charles? Either way, fight against choice. The word choice, glad you brought that up, is a euphemism for privatization. So when Governor Lee stands there and says there's a lot of people who are against choice, what they mean is privatization, as Charles was just telling you. And I think that's the fundamental point here. School choice movement is the school privatization movement. I am not against private schools. Go to one, by all means, but don't dismantle public schools to do it. And that's what we're talking about here. They want to steer public dollars to private religious schools to fuel their ideology, cling to power. Hillsdale is a prime example of it. And this is the front lines right now. And I appreciate you joining me here on the front lines on a regular basis. Keep fighting, keep pushing, and I'll talk to you next time.